Helicopter Tutorial 2 of 3, probably. Intermediate! Test servers, yay! Finally in the game. Should have been in BF3, but they are in BF4. Absolutely, positively, this is where you learn to fly. Don't try and do it in game. It's nothing worse than jumping in with a pilot who crashes instantly because he's not flown helicopters before. Multiplayer, test server, play now. And this is what you get. This is the Paracel Storm map, rendered with just the one island, and basically every type of unit that you get in game, or at least every unit from the US faction, including, obviously, all the different classes of helicopter. So we'll start here with the Viper, and we'll just run through the numbers and symbology that you see on the head-up display. So we'll start with countermeasures, which is top left. When you fire countermeasures, it will give you an active indication, and that means that your countermeasure is effectively distracting missiles or lock-ons, and you will then get a countdown timer, which is the time during which you'll have to wait for your countermeasure to recharge, after which you can use it again. Down from that on the left are 0G. G, I don't know what G is. It's a unit of some sort, but it's speed basically. The faster you go, the higher the number, the slower you go, the lower the number. That will indicate speed for forwards, backwards and sideways flight as well. Next down, the number in the box is power. 10 being the least you'll ever see, that's essentially the amount of power required to just turn the rotors without providing any lift, and 100 being the maximum amount of power you could ever need, or want, or require. Hover power, i.e. the amount of power required to keep you in a hover without increasing or decreasing height, keeping you in the same place, is about 55, well it's sort of between 55 and 56. On the console, if you just let go of the triggers which control power normally, depending on which button setup you've got, you'll find it sets it at 55. And with that you will find that it will very slowly descend and land eventually. Over on the right hand side we have all our altitude information. The number top right represents your altitude above a fixed point. That point isn't necessarily the same on all maps, and it means that when you land on the ground it won't necessarily read 0, but it is always fixed. Below that, the number in the box is radar altitude, and that is a number which represents the distance between the bottom of the helicopter and whatever surface is directly beneath it. This graphic on the right hand side is a visual representation of that radar altitude. The higher you are, the taller the solid green bar will be, and the lower you are, the less of it you'll see. So as we approach this building, once over the top you can see it jumps down because we're much closer to the surface of the roof, and then as we pass over it, it rises again, and as we climb you can see it goes pretty much all the way to the top, and the top is just the maximum limit of the radar altitude reading. Finally, on the right we have the arrow that is next to the radar bar, and that represents your rate of climb or descent indicator. When you're flying straight and level it will sit here, and when you're climbing, depending on how quickly you're climbing, that arrow will rise above that point, and similarly descending, depending on how quickly you're descending, that arrow will drop below that point. Lastly, for this tutorial, the bar highlighted in the middle of the head-up display there represents your horizon level. You won't necessarily be able to see the horizon itself in game if it's obscured by hills or buildings or other scenery, but it will give you an indication of the attitude of the aircraft. When it's lined up in the middle there with that cross central to the head-up display, your wings will be level, i.e. no roll left and right, and the nose of the aircraft will be level, i.e. no pitch up and down. This can be particularly useful when you're trying to hover in one position, as long as you're not moving forwards or backwards, left or right across the ground. If you keep that cross and that bar lined up, you should stay stationary. Now, landing. You cannot damage the helicopters if you land on the landing gear, in this case the skids. No matter how hard you hit the ground, or anything else for that matter, as long as you hit the skids, you'll be fine. If you come down nose or tail first, you will cause damage to the helicopter. The amount just depends on how hard you hit. If you hit hard enough, of course, you might just instantly explode, or technically speaking, insta-splode. If you do take damage, self-inflicted or otherwise, there are a couple of things to bear in mind. The next step down from insta-splode is fire. You'll know you're on fire because it'll start beeping and a fire caption will come up in the middle of the head-up display. If you're playing normal core mode, the damage indicator on the right will flash and the number will gradually tick down to 0 and you will eventually explode. Now you can take damage without it being quite that catastrophic, and what happens when you do is that you get a warning saying critical damage and low power, which will eventually go, but it's important to understand that it also restricts the amount of power you can pull to 62%. And that's obviously important if you're flying low or flying fast and you know you're about to take damage. So if you've used your countermeasures and another missile's on its way and you know it's going to hit, that's the point at which you want to fly away from the ground or any obstacles you're heading towards, so that when you lose that power you're not going to crash into anything. Once the beeping stops, you have 100% power available again, and if you're playing regular core mode, the helicopter will magically fix itself. Or if you're playing proper hardcore mode, you can land and take on some repairs. Let's just take a quick look at the different types, the different classes of helicopter in BF4. This is the Scout class of helicopter. This is the Little Bird for the US faction. Now, they're not the fastest helicopter, but they are ultra manoeuvrable. They're generally good for getting in and out of small places with people. They're good for transport and generally making a nuisance of themselves. Where the attack helicopters had a little cross to mark the position of the aircraft nose, both Scout and transport helicopters have that little W looking symbol. The cross that's floating around the centre there is, in this case, the gun aiming reticule, which I'll probably cover in a later tutorial. Common to all the aircraft in BF4, right at the top of the display, is the compass. Just below that is an arc of lines which represents the amount of roll you've got on, otherwise known as your angle of bank. One handy hint I can give you is that the rotor blades, although they extend quite far either side of the helicopter, are not actually rendered as objects in-game, so you can't actually hit anything with them. The fuselage of the aircraft obviously is an entirely different matter. The third class, and probably least glamorous, is the transport class. This, with the American faction, of course, is the UH-1, and these are probably the most useful really, because you can spawn directly to them, as long as they're not full on the battlefield, and as long as it's got somebody in it, you can spawn on it, wherever it is. Its object really is to get people to the flags, or to the objectives, and a couple of miniguns on the side, which aren't terribly effective, but they do annoy, so it's all good. Those are all things that should definitely be kept in mind though when you're flying transport. I find it quite effective to circle an objective like this, for a number of reasons. Firstly, you can keep a stable platform for the miniguns on the side to shoot down into the target and generally annoy the guys on the ground. You can provide a spawn location close to the objective for friendly troops to get in and attack, and also you're not too much of an easy target for RPGs and tanks if you're continually on the move. People often have quite a problem landing this thing, particularly on rooftops and tight spaces like this, because the instrument panel is so large and it obscures a lot of your vision. It often helps to come in slightly sideways and with the aircraft pitched down so that you can see exactly what you're going to be hitting. If you're playing normal core game mode, obviously you can use the external view, but that's cheating. Don't do that. No, I'm just kidding. You can do that if you want. It's just a bit. You know, it's just a bit. You know. I'll talk about one last thing just very quickly, and that is map ceilings. Each map has a height at which you can simply go no further. In this case, it's just over 1,000 Bs. It's handy to remember the number on each map, particularly if you're flying jets, because if you hit the ceiling of a map in a jet, you'll find yourself getting stuck more often than not, and it can take quite a while to get back down. But essentially in a helicopter it's not too much of an issue, it'll just stop climbing. Just for a change, because I haven't done it yet in tutorial 2, I'm going to go upside down. It's a good map for doing it on this one because you've got lots of room to play with. There's no buildings or hills to hit. And that pretty much wraps it up. I think there'll be a third one. I'll base that on combat really, so it'll be the third. I'll call it probably an advanced tutorial, I don't know, advanced, basic, intermediate, advanced, etc.